By the time I hit publish on this video, the internet as we know it would have ceased to exist and the evil forces of globalism would have already assumed control and deleted this channel, deleted all the websites we as non-leftists read and love, and basically the apocalypse would have occurred. That is the rationale on which I started my working night on Friday evening after my regular podcast with AVFM when I saw the video posted by Rebel Media on the topic. And then I joined IRC and got more of this rationale. I mean, maybe, just maybe, there is an ignorance-driven overreaction somewhere along the way? Maybe? Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so this is basically a request from a long-time subscriber and patron of this channel. I wanted to do a video on this twice in the last month, but every time I ended up postponing it because I'm not really convinced, in fact I'm not convinced at all, that it is really a big issue. So we're talking about the ICANN issue. Now before saying anything, I should probably explain a few things, so let us begin. Now, when you want to come to see if I uploaded any new videos, you either first go on YouTube and search for my channel, or look into your subscriptions, or you know the dedicated URL. That will be youtube.com/c/freedom alternative. Any of these methods have something in common, the youtube.com URL. Now, all of this is possible thanks to the work of a non-profit corporation called the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN. Now, without them, you would have to know the exact number for YouTube, like a phone number, which is called an IP address. Now, the number for YouTube these days is 216.58.201.46. And I say these days because that number isn't necessarily constant. Sometimes it changes. But thanks to ICANN, you don't have to worry about that because youtube.com dials you to YouTube anyway, since ICANN constantly updates its registry and notices if YouTube changes its number. So basically ICANN is like a phone book, except that they also allocate the phone numbers, that would be the IPs. Now I do imagine the techies watching this are probably cringing at the analogy and screaming into the screen, it's more complex than that. Yes, I know it's more complex than that, but please bear with me. Now, this corporation was founded by the United States government in September 1998 with the purpose of preserving the operational stability of the internet. Now, having a centralized phone book was thought of, correctly I might add, as being more efficient and especially more stable than having different alternative phone books around the world. Now, those of you who are older on the internet probably do remember the internet of early to mid-1990s, which was radically different than what it is today. And part of the reason the internet was less entertaining than it is today is precisely the difficulty in accessing stuff online once connectivity was achieved. Anyway, that's probably a story for another day. So, this corporation, founded by the US federal government, was then largely left alone as ICANN kinda governed itself and the internet continued to be basically run by a consensus of engineers and geeks from around the world. And this has continued to be the case till present day. Also, in 2005, there was an event in Tunisia called the World Summit on the Information Society, where the issue of the United Nations taking over ICANN was discussed and eventually rejected following the US government's and this part is important, and worries expressed by the actual geeks who make this magic possible, that a UN takeover would actually lead to another fracturing of the internet and render ICANN's existence moot. Now, whether that was indeed the case or not is of little importance. What is of importance is that these things aren't exactly new. These kinds of talks and concerns are remarkably old, especially in internet time where everything older than 6 months is basically ancient history. So, now with all of that in mind, we now come to present day, when we have a sudden outburst of outright hysteria from certain people, including people I never expect to hear such reactions from, such as Lauren Southern, who took the bait wholeheartedly from Stefan Molyneux, an individual who knows how to frame an issue to create alarm where none is needed. Now let's watch this short clip, shall we?
While brushing my teeth this morning, what I got was a terrifying doomsday message for my career and for communication as a whole, of apparently the internet being sold off to foreign dictators and globalists at the United Nations. I'm still trying to take in what's going on here, so if you could please go over this insanity with the viewers, that would be amazing.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, it sounds like hyperbole alert, the death of the internet.
It sounds like hyperbole. That is to put it mildly. I suggest you do watch the whole video I quoted, links in the low bar, because it's a nice peek into how hysteria can be whipped up using incomplete information. Because, mind you, Stefan Molyneux does not lie in that video. He just leaves out a lot of intel. Anyway, that video is already outdated because the court case has been tossed out. The courts decided that the handing of the control of ICANN by the US government is perfectly okay, so it's a done deal. Now, on to what the alarmists are leaving out from the conversation, whether intentionally or out of ignorance. For starters, this handing over of ICANN has been in the making for many years, at least 5 years, most likely more than that. So if the Congress really wanted to stop this, it had multiple opportunities to speak out, stand up to Obama, and generally do a lot more to prevent it if they really thought this is not something that the federal government should just hand over. Secondly, the role of the US government in the affairs of ICANN has been similar to the role of the President of Germany in running Germany, that is to say, a decorative one, purely formal, no substance whatsoever, and generally no real power over the thing. This has been the case at least since 2004, so the idea that this move somehow fundamentally changes things is really bizarre, given that the move really does not change anything of substance. Now, the argument of the alarmist camp is that it opens a can of worms, and I'll deal with that in a moment, but I first need to say this. The handing over of ICANN is a purely symbolic process. It is, indeed, a PR blow to American leadership, and also a long-term PR blow because it shows, once again, that the elites in America don't even want leadership, let alone be capable of it. Now, purely in legal terms, ICANN's contract with the US government expired and the Congress did nothing about it and allowed it to expire. So now ICANN doesn't necessarily have to run the service the way the US government wants, but it can also accept input from somewhere else. But again, outside of the legalese surrounding the issue, which is boring and barely interesting, the real world, in the real world, i.e. in the de facto rather than de jure territory, nothing will change for the simple reason that the service was already run in practice by a global consensus of engineers, geeks, and users. If anything, this move simply formalizes what has already been going on for over a decade. Now, on to the alarmist concerns, which are plentiful and mostly wrong. I heard a few of them, and there's certainly not enough time to refute all of them, so let's settle with 3. The first is, the internet is being sold to foreign dictatorship like China or Saudi Arabia. Molyneux claimed something along those lines in the rebel.media video. Now, for starters, Saudi Arabia hasn't gotten around to send its governmental advisory committee representative to ICANN, even though it has had this ability, again, for at least 11 years. China did so, but Saudi Arabia didn't, neither did Kazakhstan or Ireland for that matter. Heck, Ireland is the European center for online business, yet the Irish government isn't represented at ICANN, even though it has been invited, just like the entire world, at least since 2005, if not earlier. That's one aspect of the issue. The other aspect is that Countries like China or Iran, both represented at ICANN for years now, have been able to set up their own censorship tools without much of an issue. Now, if the alarmist point that the control of the US government is essential had indeed been true, then such censorship measures like the Great Firewall of China could not have been implemented, isn't it? But they did, which should indicate what are the limits of the power ICANN has or has had till present day. Second point, entire providers could be blocked. Now this argument goes something like this. With the internet suddenly ceded to a vague human rights guidelines instead of First Amendment protections, guidelines for internet service providers around the world could emerge, and ISPs who refuse to abide by them and still provide services to swaths of politically incorrect users could be taken down. Now this whole argument falls flat on the fact that ICANN does not have and never had that kind of power. You simply cannot take down an internet service provider, at least not with the power of ICANN anyway. The third alarmist argument, this move would make censorship easier. And this is really the crux of the concern these days. Again, reality shows us differently. The United Kingdom and Germany, for instance, have internet censorship that is oftentimes harsher than dictatorships like Turkmenistan or Belarus, even though these two countries have had a disproportionate amount of influence over ICANN already, even with the US government formally controlling the organization. By the same token, countries like Turkey, China, or Iran have been able to implement moderately successful censorship programs even without any influence on ICANN. The concern that this move would somehow change that for the worse lies in a fundamental misunderstanding on how the internet works. For starters, ICANN's database is not unique. I'll leave a link in the low bar with a whole list of alternative DNS servers that have been in existence for quite a while and will continue to be in existence from now on. Heck, when Turkey blocked Twitter, what actually happened was the government blocking ICANN's phonebook reference, which told devices that twitter.com means either 104.244.42.1 or 104.224.42.65. As a result, graffiti with alternative DNS servers started appearing on various walls, and before you know it, the whole country was back on Twitter before the government even got around to check if their censorship measure actually works. So even if we do take the worst case scenario, let's say Saudi Arabia gets to have a disproportionate amount of influence over ICANN, which is quite literally impossible to happen, but let's assume it for the sake of the argument, what would Saudi Arabia do? Let's say it would try to block, Breitbart.com. The very same hour, most Breitbart fans would simply switch from the default ICANN DNS to another one, let's say Google's DNS. There, problem solved. This is exactly what has been discussed at the World Summit on the Information Society 11 years ago, and why everyone agreed that bringing in UN bureaucrats, which usually means bringing in totalitarians from places like the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, they decided since then that bringing in such bureaucrats is a bad idea. And most of those people are still in ICANN today, and that agreement is still binding, and will continue to be for quite a long period of time. So, in short, this move will not make censorship easier, nor it will make it harder. In practice, virtually nothing will change. Now, with that said, there are a few legitimate concerns with regards to ICANN, but these concerns have been around since ICANN's formation and will continue to be around for as long as ICANN exists. For instance, the fear of a refragmentation of the internet is looming over most stakeholders in this issue. But then again, the refragmentation of the internet has already begun, and not out of the fault of ICANN, but out of the fault of various governments criminalizing various activities. For instance, the existence of the darknet is one such example of internet fragmentation. After all, what is the darknet? It's basically a separate internet where ICANN's rules are intentionally disregarded. In order to access that one, all you need is the IP address of the alternative DNS for that network. And there are many dark nets out there, so internet fragmentation is somewhat of an issue already. And that is why I think the frenzy over this particular issue is kind of blown out of proportion. There aren't really too many evil things that can realistically be accomplished via ICANN. I mean, sure, in theory, a malevolent actor could briefly turn the internet dark, but then again, briefly, because all it would take is for users to use an alternative mirror of the mainstream and the whole thing is back in business before the hypothetical malevolent actor could finish writing his victory speech. And again, this thing could have happened until now as well, and since the alleged First Amendment protections are worth exactly nothing if you're under a cyber attack. I don't know, just saying. So yeah, basically, chill out, folks. The internet isn't going to hell in a handbasket. We're not going to be erased from the internet by China, and we won't be having a halal internet imposed on us by Saudi Arabia. The methods of subversion will still have to remain the same, namely Saudi sheiks buying stocks at Twitter and make Twitter halal again. Or ideological progressives to run platforms, like in the case of Halal Book. The only real, but not so real, concern with this whole ICANN thing is the one that now the NSA and the CIA can formalize their already existing spying programs, since they no longer have to pretend that they give a toss about the Fourth Amendment, since the internet is no longer legally the United States soil. Again, this is merely a formalization of what's already happening, since it is no longer a secret that the NSA spies on everybody, but they had to pretend they don't do that on Americans. Now they will no longer have to pretend that. That's really the only expected change in the near future. Otherwise, most concerns that have been floating around are either completely impossible and thus stem from the fact that the utterers don't know how the internet works, or have already been possible so far anyway. Besides, it's not like ICANN is moving shop to New York at the UN headquarters, or in Brussels, or in Frankfurt, or in Beijing. So, for all intents and purposes, most US laws still do apply to ICANN, and California has its own free speech laws that do extend to private actors in a dominant position. Now, this is an aspect of the Californian law that Twitter is concerned with these days because of their purely ideological purges they've been conducting lately. But that's a topic for another day. So, with all of that being said, I hope this video sheds some light over the ICANN issue and calms a bit from the anxiety that some users have been having lately. Thank you all for watching, thank you for your generous and continuous support, and I guess I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.